If you believe that there is a truth and it can be had and you can find it, you can get it, you can search for it, you can dig, whatever it is, that you can find it, I think truth will carry you through. And you can hold on to that. And you can think it of a way. A hurricane of life comes. And if you can get a hold of the steel of truth and hold on to it, it will keep you up and through, and truth will win.
If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me and Josh talk about MWI, which is our digital marketing agency. If you're new around here, this may be a first introduction to MWI. We're a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in everything from website design and development to search engine optimization and all forms of paid advertising, whether it's paid social advertising or paid search advertising, content marketing, digital PR, social media management, basically anything a business needs to strengthen and grow their digital footprint is what we do over at MWI. The website is mwi.com. And for any listeners of the Hope Strategy podcast, I'd love to offer a free 20-minute consultation with yours truly to talk about your business, to talk about your goals, to understand, what you need to be doing from a digital marketing strategy and action plan standpoint in order to yield some results and grow your business online. So please reach out at mwi.com/hope strategy. That's mwi.com/hope strategy to sign up, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Stanley.
Well, let's start there real quick, because I know that's one of the things that people notice right when they, like I said. So just a real quick background real fast. So the other day I walked into a restaurant in Arizona and I sat down at the table just by myself. I actually had just gone for a drive. I was on a work call and I just drove aimlessly for a little while, and I end up at this restaurant I haven't been to in who knows how long. It's probably been over a year since I've been to this restaurant. It's quite a ways from my house. And I sit down and I start eating my cheese enchilada lunch special. And I recognize the voice at the table sitting next to me as one that I had just spent 3 or 4 hours with a few days prior. And I kind of peeked around the table, or I got up to go get a napkin or something, and I kind of glanced down and I see Shannon sitting there. And I said, that's who I thought it was. That's Shannon Flynn from the Murder Among the Mormons documentary that my wife and I had just binge watched, as they say, with Netflix over a couple of days. And so you were so nice to take a minute and talk to me and take a picture. And then I said, you know what, it would be fascinating to get on a conversation with you on the podcast. And now here we are. So thank you so much for doing that. For one, not just telling me to turn around and walk away at the restaurant, for talking to me in the first place, and then now for taking some time to chat.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. I like it if people like yourself, if I can tell usually if you want to say something.
Yeah.
And so I don't make it hard, make you work for it. So now, so long as you don't want to tell me about space aliens or something,
Well, I asked you at the restaurant, but I'll ask you again here. How has your life changed in the past couple of weeks? What was it, a month ago, maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago that the documentary came out? I mean, it hasn't been very long.
It premiered March 3rd.
Okay, so not even
less than a month.
And have you been noticing that? Am I one of many that have spotted you in the wild and started talking to you?
Very few, actually. And I have people ask me that. Oh, I was going to call you, but I knew you're on the phone all the time. It's not true. Sometimes, like now, I'm busy, but tomorrow, my guess is nothing. Just nothing. And I don't know why, or I don't know. I don't know.
Well, the thing about those shows is that once they're on Netflix, very rarely do they come off. So it's going to be, I mean, I'm sure it'll be an interesting cyclical up and down where every now and then people are watching it a lot and recognizing you, and sometimes they're not. I had asked you, or you had told me, and again, what I was going to say before is your voice. Obviously, you brought it up before. You said that you had lung cancer and you had a surgery where they removed part of your lung, and that's where the voice comes from, right?
Yeah. It's been almost exactly 2 years ago this week that I had the first of a couple surgeries where I had acquired squamous cell carcinoma.
Yeah.
And that's a smoker's cancer.
Yeah.
I've never smoked once in my whole life.
What's the explanation? Sometimes you just luck of the draw, I guess.
It's total bad luck. I had a pulmonologist talk to me at length about, did you smoke? Did you do this? Did you do that? And at the end of it, he said, I don't know if you're religious, but if you are, you need to thank God, because I had a cough, a persistent cough. And he said, without that, you'd be dead now, because there was nothing to look for. So it was just bad luck.
Yeah.
But anyway, the nerves to your vocal cords actually go down and then come back up again. And on the left side, it loops underneath your aorta. And it was a medical mistake. And that nerve was cut or something. And so my left vocal cord is paralyzed and it will never come back. And so now I just work with my right. And I just have to. That's just my life forever.
Is it exhausting? Is it something that you notice regularly, or is it harder to kind of talk for longer periods of time, or does it not, do you not notice it as much except for the way that it sounds coming out?
I notice every second of my life.
Ugh.
My voice did not sound like this. I have recordings of what it was like before, and I could speak very well. I could do accents in a number of languages. I could make all kinds of sounds. And now it's gone. And so now I just have to struggle with what I have. And you'll see that not only is it a bad timbre, but I have trouble just in speaking. You'll see, like right now, it's starting to change, going down. Then it'll come back up again. And sometimes I have to stop, calm myself down, and speak again. And so it's just completely changed my life.
Yeah. That's difficult. I mean, obviously few things you use as much as your voice on a regular basis. What was that transition? I mean, I'm guessing you go through all the cycles of finding out, one, you have cancer, and then it's, well, this, when you have the C word, as you know, I actually had an oncologist, a world famous oncologist on the podcast not very long ago. And we talked all about how he, as an oncologist working with cancer patients, one of the big things that he focuses on in his practice and working with patients is hope, because most people hear, as he put it, the C word and lose hope. It sucks the wind out of the sails pretty quickly because it's such a scary thing. So I'm sure there was a big emotional roller coaster of, okay, I've got cancer. Am I going to survive this cancer? I've got to go through the treatment, and then on the tail end of it to be cancer free, but have this lasting effect. I mean, I'm sure that was a pretty tough transition, kind of a mourning process, right? That's something difficult to lose.
Well, it certainly has given me an opportunity, and this is a really bad opportunity. In other words, I don't want it, and I would not wish this on anybody, but it has given me very poignant and powerful change of view of life. This happened when I was 61. I didn't think I would be close to dying at 61. For no reason, nothing that I did. And part of the process is I've had surgery for the cancer twice. I've had radiation therapy and chemotherapy. And now I go back. I'm not cured. They never let those words pass their lips before at a minimum 5 years. But I've had 3 scans, the last 3, that it's been nothing. And so it's great. I'm heading up. I'm not heading down. And of course, being at the oncology, you come out of there, and I still do, weeping sometimes, because I'll go for my visit, then I'll walk down the hall, and where I go, at the end of the hall, you can see the area where people are getting their chemotherapy. And so there's these people sitting in chairs with the IVs next to them. Some of them, this was never for me, but some of them so bad that they're getting this so often, they put PICC lines in their chest because sticking a needle is just too often. So they carry that around. And you gotta know that those people in there, not all of them are gonna survive.
Yeah.
And you sit there and you think, I get to walk out of here today and now not come back for 6 months. Yay! That's great. And I see people that they're not going to come out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Talk about perspective and appreciation and difficult. I mean, I think, cancer is one of those things where you're hard pressed to find anybody that hasn't been affected by it in one way or another, by a family member or a close friend, or, and I remember my grandpa, I told you when I met you, but my grandpa died of lung cancer, and he got it, again, never smoked or anything in his whole life, and surprisingly got it, but he worked in uranium mines as a kid. And a lot of people where he was from that worked in the uranium mines where he was had that. But I remember that transition, that process of watching him and seeing the pictures and seeing him in there with so many people. And it's just a numbers game. Some of the people are coming in and they're going to leave healthy and fine over time, and some are going to come in and never leave. So I appreciate it. Don't ever apologize for getting emotional when this, again, with anything, but that I completely
it's
appreciate
just
the perspective.
And you get a different view of your life and other people and what's important with something like that. So like I say, I don't feel sad for me. I feel sad for the people that aren't going to make it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That is incredible.
How do you live with that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
As we talk today, we're going to go into talk a lot about your experience in this previously. I mean, it's always been very well known, it's kind of gone up and down, but recently it's been very, very well known because of, again, this documentary. So if you haven't watched the documentary on Netflix, Murder Among the Mormons, go watch it. It's unbelievable. The story is incredible and sad and mind-boggling, and I mean, it's all of, has all the emotions and all of the suspense and all of anything you would expect from a documentary like that. But Shannon, who we're talking with today, plays a pivotal role in this story. The main, the terrible human being that did horrible things, and that we're going to talk about. There's going to be some spoilers here if you haven't seen or heard this story before. But Mark Hofmann and Shannon were close friends. They were business colleagues. They were, very close for a number of years. And Shannon was, as close as anybody to this incredible saga that took place in the mid 80s in Utah with, anyways, we'll get all into it, but it's going to be an interesting conversation, and hopefully we'll get some interesting, questions answered. And I've got a lot of them. So tell me first off, where you grew up. Did you grow up in Utah, close to where this all took place in the mid 80s? And what was your upbringing like?
Yeah, I was born in Salt Lake City, And except for a couple of years, I grew up out in the Taylorsville area. And so I went to elementary school and junior high out there. And then I went to high school at Cottonwood High School. We took a bus clear across the valley. And that was a real good thing for me because that was a very academically advanced high school. And so I was able to take advantage of that. My parents, great people, and I could talk a lot about them. And then there was three kids. I was the oldest, and then I had two younger sisters. I still do one. The middle one is Erin, and she still lives in the same area. And then the youngest one, Colleen, she actually passed away in 1989. And so there's just the two of us now, and my parents passed away a few years ago. And so I came from a regular growing up, but not that unusual. I don't think. I got to be with smart kids in high school. My best friend in high school was the valedictorian, and so I kind of hung out with that.
What were your parents like? What did they do? You said you could talk about them all day. What did your parents do? What were they like?
Sure. My dad was in the construction business, concrete construction, and owned his own small business and did his whole life. He died when he was 84, and he literally did that his entire life. He suffered a stroke, and so he was, bedridden for 9 months, but he literally was still working that business, just 9 months before he passed away. And he was born and raised in Salt Lake. And his dad was in the construction business also. My mother is Scottish. She was born and raised in Glasgow, Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And she immigrated when she was 24 years old. And I say emigrated because she didn't come to Utah for a visit. She moved.
Did she come for school, or she was just planning on, was she a member of the church at that point?
Yes. She had joined the church at 21 and served a mission. And in those days, the native sisters just went for a year, about 18 months. And so she had a couple of companions, and one she really liked and got along well with, and she lived in Salt Lake. And so when she emigrated, that missionary, her family was her sponsor. Okay. And so she did not plan on going back, and traveled back, but never moved again. And,
so just real quick. So we're going to say a lot in this conversation again. So when we refer to the church, we're talking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon, in the Mormon faith, in the title, Murder Among the Mormons. That's, you can assume that that's what we're talking about. If you've listened to the podcast, you know that I am a member of that faith. Shannon is as well. And so sometimes we may just refer to it as the church, or we may talk about missions, which you may have heard talked about before, and all these different things. But so you grew up in a typical LDS Mormon family in Salt Lake City, Utah. One of the things that I want to talk about in this is, for anybody that doesn't understand this and that isn't a member of the LDS faith, think of a Jewish faith or the Catholic faith or something, and imagine if you had, dedicated your life in a lot of ways. Did you serve a mission, Shannon?
Yes.
So literally, dedicated your upbringing and do what you did and what you didn't do so closely revolved around this faith and this religion. And then you go and you serve what we call a mission, where you go leave for 2 years and you're, dedicating literally all day, every single day to your faith. And so doing all of that. And then what we're going to get to later when we talk about this Mark Hofmann thing is having that testimony, as we call it, or that faith really put to the test? Because imagine if you were, like I said, if you were Jewish or you were Catholic or Baptist or whatever, and you had this real dedication, but then, and you got really close to it, but then you had some very, very harsh or hard questions or trials of that faith. Oftentimes what happens is people would fade away and they would say, well, I don't believe this anymore. You know, I understand things differently now. I don't want to follow this anymore. I don't want to believe in this or whatever. And you have been very much put to the test as you went through this process. And so all of this is a preface for the question, why did you have, and why do you have, but as you were growing up in this faith, what were the key factors that really built up this faith and this testimony that you still have, but you had that really anchored you through, and it has anchored you through some difficult trials and tests of that faith? What was your, how were you impacted growing up, and how was that testimony built?
Well, I served a mission in Brazil, and I loved it. I've been back to Brazil 3 times in the years since. I'd go to Brazil tomorrow again if I could. And so that really made a big difference. And it's interesting that you bring that up because, as you said, this is going to play a part. Mark Hofmann also served a mission. Brent Metcalf also served a mission. Kurt Bench, as you watch the people on this thing, on this documentary, Kurt Bench served a mission. Richard Turley served a mission. Al Rust, I'm not sure. And then, of course, there's other people that the viewers will look at. Sandra Tanner did not serve a mission, and it's just the opposite.
Yeah, she served another mission. Another type of mission.
Yeah. There's, several in there that are quite opposite. And since such a large portion of the forgeries and documents and stuff all involve the LDS Church, its history, its doctrine, all of these things play a big role and have a factor. Now, the Mormon Church, for me, it's no different than any other church in the world. And so I think that people that are watching this, that are not Mormons, but are of some other religious faith, this will be very understandable to them. There's lots of people who are born and raised Catholic. They go with their family to Sunday services. And then sometime in their life, they just say, this isn't for me, or this isn't working. They leave. And that is true. And I'm not just picking on that. Yeah. Any Jewish people, Episcopalian, Muslim, anything, has the same cycle. And so if you're from that, and as we're talking about this and you watch the documentary, I think it makes it much more relatable that you say, oh, so it's kind of like this person I know in my church told me. That's what I did. I used to go, and now I don't.
You mentioned your mission to Brazil. What about, was that when you really felt like you gained a really strong faith and testimony?
Well, I would like to say yes, strongly, but I don't think I can. And the reason I say that, Mark Hofmann went on a mission. Brent Metcalf went on a mission. Both of them have left the church. But then there's people like me and Kurt Bench and the ones I talked about who went on missions, and we have stayed. What is it in that brain that makes that change? Now in here, and I want to say something because I want to make sure that people understand. Brent Metcalf went on a mission, but he's not bitter. This has not turned him into a mean or a bad person. He just goes a different way, looks at his life differently.
Yeah.
Mark, it didn't do anything to make him a member. And he turned really mean. So those two are not the same.
a lot of people would make the argument that it's not as much in the brain as it is in as cheesy as it sounds, more in the heart, where you have that in any religion, whatever your religious creed or, faith, the change of heart is what a lot of religion is about. Right. So, and that's the interesting relationship between heart and brain and logic in religion is a lot of people really dive into the logical side or the brain side of it, and they start to ask questions and say, I can't wrap my mind around this. This doesn't make any logical sense as I, look at it scientifically or, through physics or whatever. This doesn't add up, this whole creation and this whole faith and, some guy that lives 2,000 years ago. Whereas other people say, I agree, it does not make sense in a lot of ways logically, but there is the heart involved, and that's where that faith comes in, right? And oftentimes you really have to have that faith tested in order to really be able to grasp onto it when you need it the most. So so it's interesting with somebody like Mark, or you mentioned Brent, and again, some I don't know, it's an interesting topic, the heart versus the brain and how it changes you.
And for so many people, that, as you just said, the heart and the intellect, or the heart and the mind. With this documentary, this becomes such an integral part of what happens. Mm-hmm. Because some of the stuff that Mark forged, it shifted the way people thought about the founding of the Mormon Church. And it was enough of a change that they said, this is it. I can't go anymore. Mm-hmm. This changes what I used to believe. This changes what I was taught as a child. And now this is different. And my mind says to my heart, you can't go anymore.
Yeah.
I heard those same things, and it didn't make me leave. But I know that there's thousands that the intellect changed the way they looked at the church. I used to believe this. I was taught this in Sunday schools, or, the way you learn at a church. And now somebody's telling me it's different. And I think this can happen with any religion. How many Catholics do that? They learn something about a pope, and a pope did bad things or whatever. I'm done. Or they find that a priest had committed some sins. I mean, nowadays, the Catholic priests, especially in the United States, in the past 15 years, what they've been going through with pedophilia, and how many Catholics that's it. Yep. I can't go anymore. That changes the thing for me. I can't go.
So Mark Hofmann, just to present who he was and what he did, and then we're going to get into a lot more of the details, and I want to keep track here, keep on track here. But so he goes on a mission. He grows up a member of the church. A member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He goes on a mission to England. While he's on his mission in England, later it comes out that he's keeping journals and really, really questioning his faith a lot. And really, you could look at this and say the only reason it seems that he was on a mission for his church was outside pressure, parents expecting it. He's going along with the status quo. That's what you do when you're 19. You go, you get the thing, you go do it. But he was pretty, at that point, would you say that he was, from a testimony standpoint, from a faith standpoint, he was kind of already far gone, right? He didn't really believe much of what he was saying on a day-to-day basis, did he?
Well, not at all. And let me explain this, because this is important to understand. He actually quit believing in the Mormon Church and became atheist at least by the age of 14.
But didn't tell anybody? Just was
no.
In his head.
And maybe before that. And that is something, if I could ever talk to him again, would be one of my questions for him.
Yeah.
When, at what age did you quit believing? That sort of thing. But part of who he is he was able to keep up a lie to unbelievable lengths. So when it came time to say, yes, I'll go on a mission, or no, I won't, he said yes. And he did a good job as a missionary. His mission president had in fact, I don't think anybody that was with him, church member, would have known that he is atheist. He gets married in the Mormon temple. And his wife, poor Dorlee, she never knew he was atheist for, I think, all of their married life.
So this is it's fascinating again too. So if you don't know this process, when you go on one of these missions where he went to England for 2 years, you're with another member of the church that's a missionary with you 24/7. You literally don't leave each other's sight. It's against their rules to leave each other's sight because they want you to stay committed and faithful and loyal. And that's just the way it is, and safe. I get, there's that side of it as well. And they want you to have each other's back the whole time. So this goes, if you consider that as a young man, as a 14 or 15-year-old, he's now atheist. He doesn't believe in this. It wasn't a passive action on his part to remain a member of the church and to go on a mission. It was a very he had to take a lot of action, like turning in some paperwork to say, yeah, I believe in all this. I want to go serve a church. And I want to baptize people into the church. And I'm going to travel all the way across the world to England. And I'm going to every single day be with somebody else. And so you start to see the pathology of somebody like him who turns out to be a psychopath, I guess, is, a very troubled mentally, that did some terrible things. You start to see this trend very early on. If he's able to do that and able to lead everybody on, and not only, again, passively, but 24/7, actively engage in this religion and in this work that he was doing, but really to just be doing it with this kind of cynical, I don't believe any of this stuff anyway. And again, then stuff comes out later with the journals he was keeping, questioning everything and basically trying to disprove a lot of what the LDS faith believes, while at the same time actively, for all intents and purposes, trying to baptize more people and get more members of the church. It's a very interesting psychological, whatever you would call that, it's fascinating.
It is, let me tell you the depth that went to. In the Mormon church, active Mormons wear an undergarment, clothing. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure most people have heard something about that. But that's kind of, that's one of the things that when a person doesn't want to be an active member anymore, they take those off and they don't wear them. It would be similar to a Jewish fellow wearing a yarmulke. Mm-hmm. So from the outside,
yeah, it's an outward sign of an inward belief or commitment to some religion, right? That's what the garment is.
Exactly. The day that he blows himself up, a passerby who's another Mormon goes up to render aid to him. Mm-hmm. And his clothing is torn. And so he can see that the man, that he doesn't know who it is, he's never seen him, has the undergarments on. In other words, has the yarmulke on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The day he blows himself up, he is still keeping the lie going full force. My mouth stops talking. What do you say?
Yeah.
How can you understand that?
Yeah. I mean, the psychology there is unbelievable and it's just to keep up the facade, right? When his wife sees him get ready in the morning, I've got to put on my garments because that's my sign that I'm a loyal, faithful member of this church and husband to you and parent, father to the kids. And yeah, but then he's going and, as we'll talk about, committing murder, and accidentally almost killing himself too.
And he had his garments on.
Yeah, through the whole thing.
Murdering people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Again, you just think, it's so hard to understand that.
What do you call somebody? And I'm drawing a blank on the word here because you don't want to. Maybe I guess you would, but you don't want to give him the credit, or somebody like him, the credit of calling them a genius. But what's the word for somebody that's evil? And I guess just an evil genius, I guess is I don't know. But when you, so when you think of, okay, so he goes on this mission and he starts to as a pastime, from what the documentary gathered, you can tell me if this is accurate, but as a pastime sort of on his mission, he would go to these old libraries and these old bookstores, and he would find these old books, these really old, which I'm guessing in England, there's a lot older stuff than even in the, US that you can find. These places have been around for a long time. And he starts to find some old pamphlets and old church, books from when the missionaries were there in the 1800s, early 1800s. And I'm guessing at some point a light bulb went off for him where he said, I bet I could do this. I bet I could make something that looks, feels, sounds, similar to this. Is that how it started for him? Like, because again, he becomes this master forger. What was the genesis of his, the road he went down forging all this stuff?
He started forging coins at 12 years old.
So it was already in there. Oh yeah. So tell us that real quick. That's outlined in the documentary, but as a 12-year-old, what was his con that he would pull?
Well, what he did was, as a teenager, he became interested in coins. And a lot of people do in the United States. Yeah,
coin collecting and old coins, and yeah.
That's not that unusual. But there's something in his head that he started to figure out a way to make some money by forging coins. And what he would do is he would take a legitimate coin and he would add a mint mark, because any given coin, especially in those days, they have somewhere in the coin a little letter, D or S or P, Denver, San Francisco, Philadelphia, and there's another one. And so a particular coin, a 1909 penny, I'm just making this up, but we'll get the idea. If it has no mint mark, it's worth $25 because it's old and it's pretty rare, but the no mint mark was the most common one. Now, one that has a D or a P, very few were made of that one. Well, he could buy a real coin with no mint mark. Then he learned how to add a mint mark to that. That thing went from $25 to $1,000. And he did it. And it took some experimentation. In fact, I was told at one time, the first forgery of a coin he sold as a forgery. The guy he was showing it to said, there's something wrong with this. The guy felt sorry for him and felt like he'd been taken advantage of as a kid.
Wow.
And so he paid not $1,000, but paid $50 or something.
So he was able to convince him that he had been lied to or manipulated, but he just went with it.
Right. And to make the kid not quit, And so, but he got better at it, so they could not be detected, except for one way. His first big one was at 14 years old, and it was actually examined by the U.S. Treasury and declared genuine. Once again, my mouth is hanging open. 14 years old. Yeah. And he is pulling off a coin forgery that is fooling the United States government.
Yeah. And he got a letter back, right? A document that said this is an authentic coin, and it was one that he had manufactured himself. Wow. Well, a real coin that he had added.
Here is the crazy part. He knows that he has sold this to somebody, to a coin dealer or a coin collector. And that kid can stand in front of him with a straight face and lie to him. I am lying and cheating you. 14. And you can't tell by looking at me.
Is there anything about his upbringing that you know of, or anything that leads you? I mean, is this it's just who he was and it was in him to be this lying narcissist con man? I mean, or is there anything from his upbringing or that signs point to, this type of abuse or traumatic event or You know what I mean? Like, what is there anything that you can tie back to that makes him? That's again kind of the genesis of his issue.
There's nothing that I know of, and it's a very sad thing.
Yeah,
because his family was mom and dad, and then a son, and then 2 daughters. In his situation, he was the youngest, and his 2 daughters were older. Those 2 daughters married years and years ago, and have been very nice people. Now, fortunately for them, they married so they don't go by the name Hofmann, with the unusual spelling. And, of course, his father died in 1993, and I can talk about that, and I should at some point.
yeah.
I'm not sure if his mother is still alive, but that is one of the things I feel terrible about, is that mother and father, ever since he went to prison, must have racked their brains every day trying to think, what did we do? What did we do wrong?
Yeah.
And as far as I know, and from what little I've heard from neighbors, stuff like that, nobody can point to anything. They raised him strangely. He came from a family of bad people. Nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, in the documentary, they show interviews or at least, street interviews that the news did and stuff at the time where it was neighbors and friends and stuff. They're like, no, there's no way he's involved with this. He's salt of the earth. He's a family man. He's a stalwart member of our faith, in our community, and he's a pillar of everything. Again, that the pathology there, the psychology of where he must have been at, his ability to manipulate and lie and cheat and steal is fascinating. So again,
I can say one thing.
Yeah.
What I would be really interested in is a small group of psychiatrists that could look at him and explain why if he is a psychopath, why?
Yeah.
Because maybe they would know some other people that have had problems of sociopathy or psychopathy that could explain it. But me, I don't know. I don't know what I can't, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't say, see it. It's this stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it seems like a lot of the people that that committed these types of crimes, or were these types of, narcissists that did such terrible things and had no problems lying. And, a lot of times, that's why I asked if you knew of anything, because a lot of times there is trauma in their background or some form of abuse or neglect or something, but anyways, who knows? I guess maybe we might not ever know.
I don't know. Never anything.
So, okay. So he's on, he goes on the mission and he's there. And then in time, I guess the big macro look at this is, and you can tell, and I guess this is kind of a question I'm asking you based on what my assumption is if I'm accurate. It seems to me that his end goal, if there was one, in some ways was almost this game of how can I prove wrong over time, over this crazy timeline of deceit and forgery. How can I prove wrong the LDS faith, or at least cause so again, if you're not familiar with the faith, there's you've got a prophet that's on the earth, and you've got 12 apostles that are on the earth. These are the leaders of the church, and it seems that his goal was to outsmart them and to get to the point where he could create such forgeries that he could make these leaders of the church, who were supposed to be the spiritual gurus, of the faith and the spiritual leaders of the faith, make them look dumb, make them look bad, make them look wrong by getting them to accept, the spiritual truthfulness on the spiritual side. Oh yeah, these documents are real. These experiences that this person had are true and real, and actually get them to testify of that in one way or another. All the while, him being the only person knowing that he was making all of this up. Is that accurate? Is that kind of what hindsight, it looks like that was kind of his objective in the end, other than just being crazy?
Yeah, actually, in my view, that really wasn't it. He always did forgeries that would bring in a lot of money.
So it was all money.
Whether that helped the church or hurt the church. And if it hurt, he didn't care. Didn't care a bit.
So he was just he just saw an opportunity to make money and build a business. And he knew that because of people's, devoutness or, to this religion and to all of the importance of these documents, he would be able to forge. He knew people would pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah. See, the first big forgery he sold to the LDS Church. And when I say sold, he rarely got a check. He got trade material. It was always a trade. And they would trade things they had excess of.
Like what? Give it an example.
The Anthem Transcript was the first thing. And if I recall correctly, he traded for a Book of Commandments. The second one, and at that time, I think that Book of Commandments, now he took that Book of Commandments and sold it quickly.
So the church themselves would give him something they didn't need as much for something that they wanted, and then he would take that and sell it privately to somebody that was a collector.
Exactly, of which they had excesses. So if they only had one, they wouldn't let it go. But if they had 2 or 3 or 4, see, then we can let go of one of those because we're going to trade it for a one of a kind. And the Anthem Transcript was a one of a kind.
Yeah, walk us through the Anthem Transcript, what that was. I can explain it if you'd rather, but I think I'd rather hear it from you. You saw it, touched it, took pictures of it, I believe.
Okay. My voice doesn't bother you too much.
No, not at all. Are you kidding me? Let's go all day.
Okay. One of the things that happened when Joseph Smith was translating the Book of Mormon.
Here, let's push time out on that real quick because I got to make sure I preface a lot of this. So the LDS belief is that a kid named Joseph Smith in the 1820s saw an angel who told him there's gold plates, meaning there's some gold plates with reformed, what's it called? I think ancient Reformed Egyptian or Reformed Egyptian on these plates, this book basically. Go dig it out of the ground, translate it. I'm going to give you the gift through the priesthood and through this gift you as a prophet. You're going to translate this book, and then you are going to make copies of that book in English to start, which is now known as the Book of Mormon and is translated in all languages all across the world. But that's how the LDS faith believes that the Book of Mormon came to be, was that it was a spiritual experience that a prophet had where he discovered something of ancient history and translated it. That's all very important context to understand this Anthem Transcript because, well, hopefully that's enough background to now go into the Anthem Transcript and what it was.
Okay. Thank you. You did a good job of that.
I've said it a few times.
I tend to tell stories that are way too long, way more too detailed. In the process of doing that, Joseph Smith had a friend named Martin Harris that was helping him. But Martin was always skeptical, and he wanted to have somebody check it out, see if what he was doing was true, and there was a good translation. And so some of those characters were written on a piece of paper. And this Martin Harris took it to at least 2 people. Well, after that piece of paper that Martin Harris had disappeared. Nobody knew where it was at. It just didn't survive. And so what Mark did in 1980 was to say, I found it. It's a miracle. I have this old Bible, and it's kind of glued in between a couple of pages. And he had a story about where the Bible came from, and then he showed it to one person, then another, each time rising in education. A guy that's head of special collections, and then a man with a PhD, all looking at it. And so eventually that was presented to the LDS Church, and they acquired it. And it was just a sensation, huge sensation. And it wasn't the gold plates, but it was about as close as anybody was going to come up with.
Yeah.
at that point. And so that was his first one. And you see in that one, that helped the church. Mm-hmm. That was good for the LDS church. There's another one. It's called the Joseph Smith III Blessing.
Let's go into this Anthem real quick, and I'm going to get JS3. I've got that in my notes for next. So I want to go to that. But just to, again, understand the psychology here and some of the serious deceit going on. And correct me on anything if I'm wrong, but this Anthem Transcript. So he claimed that this was a document that he found, that this would have originally been in hiding with the gold plates, right?
Well, nobody knew. It could have been there, or it could have been one of the early members. Just put it in a book or something.
Okay.
Mark Harris could have just put it in a book and taken it home and lost it.
And he claimed that he had bought this Bible, this really old Bible, from a grandson or a nephew or something that had some ties back to Joseph Smith. I can't remember, but somehow this Bible had been passed down from somebody of the time that would have been in contact with Martin Harris or Joseph Smith. And not only did he just come out of his bedroom and say, "Hey, look, I found this document," and then have the question be like, "Well, where?" And then have hit the story, because nobody was there to witness it, but have this story. He actually did, in fact, put the document into what it sounds to me like the front cover glued shut, like in between the front cover. And he glued it shut. And then he had his wife sit down and he made it just enough so that she would get suspicious and open it and say, "Oh my gosh, look what I found." He said, "Hey, honey, look at this thing I bought. Look at this old Bible I got." She then sits down at the table. He's in the other room, or whatever. That's what it made it look like. But so he has her discover it and get all excited and, "Oh my gosh, what did we find?" So the forethought that he had in this scam again, you look at just the absolute mental state, how wicked and evil and mentally, where he was, is that he was able to, he didn't mind throwing his wife under the bus, throwing his wife into this mess right out the gate, and have her actually be able to say, "Oh, it's legitimate. I found this." And she's, I'm the one that pulled this out of the book. And then from there, he went on and started, like you said, "I'm going to test this with somebody that maybe doesn't know a ton. And then I'm going to move it up to my wife. Then I'm going to move it up to the next." And then eventually he's presenting it to the prophet of the LDS faith saying, "Look what I've got. You guys are going to want this," right?
Yes. He did that on purpose, so that it wasn't him by himself.
Yeah.
In a closet finding it.
Yeah.
Somebody else did. But I'll tell you, Mark was very lucky, because several times what happened with this document happened with a few other things. One of the things to prove authenticity is to come up with a provenance. In other words, I had it and I bought it from Bill, and Bill bought it from Phil. You see?
Yeah.
Trace it back. Well, he said he bought that Bible from an antique store near Nauvoo, Illinois, which is on the very western part of Illinois, right on the Mississippi River. So what he did was he provided the provenance, because they said, "Where did you get the Bible?" And that was another thing he did. He forged names in there because it was a Smith family Bible. And so when you open the cover in the old days, I don't know if people still do this, maybe they do, but they buy family Bibles. Yeah. And you write in your marriage and then each child, and lots of people maybe still do that. But in the old days, they sure did.
Yeah.
So that was a Smith family Bible, which, that's legitimate. Anyway, he bought it at this antique store. And so the LDS church is they weren't stupid. They didn't just take it and say, "Thanks, it's real." Man, they put the effort into it and getting it authenticated as well as they could. One of the things is they checked his provenance. And so he had been with his family on a trip a summer trip about when he was, I don't know what age, 11, 15 something, that they really did go on. And so he said, I bought this from this store. And they called and they talked to the owner or the manager, something, and said, we have this guy, we have this Bible, and it's a big one, this tall, this thick, you know. And we have somebody that said, they bought this from you in approximately the year 1976, or again, I'm just making up the number.
Yeah.
But it all fit. And Mark's mom and dad would have said, yes, we went on that trip. Yes. And what happened is the manager, the owner, sat at this store and went, yes,
yeah,
I'm sure he bought that from us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, the forethought in all of these, you know, that he had, this wasn't I think I'm going to do this spur of the moment. This was very well thought out. These forgeries, these cons were he worked out all the details. I mean, until he didn't, and then it all came crashing down. But for a while, he was on top.
Same thing happened with the Salamander Letter.
Yeah,
the person that he got it from, Elwyn Doubleday. He's a relative of the inventor of baseball, and had a store in New Hampshire. Same thing. It's funny how people like to be part of a big find.
Yeah.
So they say yes, not no.
Yeah.
Lucky. It happened more than once. People, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. So going back to the human side of this a little bit, in your experience specifically, how did you meet him in the first place? You guys met kind of this hobby, and you had developed this hobby as well, right? Of finding old documents and old church memorabilia. Were you always a collector? I guess is the question first.
Yeah, no, I wasn't until after I went on a mission. And when I came, because of that, I became very interested in reading all things about my religion, other religions, church history, stuff like that. And so I met a fellow named Lynn Jacobs, who unfortunately in the documentary is completely erased. It's unfortunate because he played a very big role.
Was he interviewed for the documentary, or he wasn't involved at all?
What's that?
Was he interviewed for the documentary and they didn't put his part in, or was he not involved in it at all?
He died in 1995.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
I was upset. And Tyler Meeson, he and I had a little argument about it. And then he explained to me. And when he finished, then I went, oh, okay, now I'm not mad. Because what happened was he died in 1995. And Tyler said he is not interviewable today. And we have to shrink the number of characters that are going to be in this. Because if we get too many, viewers get too confused and they just turn it off.
And Tyler's one of the directors, right?
Directors, sorry.
Yeah.
Tyler Meeson, Jared Hess did a tremendous job on this. One of the things they did is they were able to shrink the number of people in it that could tell enough stories, but it could keep it small enough that the viewing audience in the whole world wouldn't get bored and turn it off.
So you met Mark through him?
And Jacobs.
Through Lynn. And it was, so you started getting involved in this, and then was it you said it was at a bookstore or something in Salt Lake City where people would go to search?
Deseret Book in those days used to have a pretty good section of used, rare, first editions, historical stuff. And that's where I bought my first thing was at Deseret Book. And there were a few stores around. So I would go to them. And a lot of times with Lynn. And so I knew Lynn probably 8 months, 10 months before I then met Mark. That would have been probably in 1983.
Okay.
Mid
and
1983.
And when you and Mark met, did you immediately kind of hit it off, and you recognized in him somebody that really knew what they were talking about? So you kind of, what was the relationship like, and how did that evolve?
I can't remember if we hit it off the first time because I was small potatoes.
Yeah.
You didn't need to spend time asking me for anything or asking me anything. And so I don't know how long it took. We maybe became, I'm just trying to think about this, and I don't know. It may have been, I went with Lynn to Mark's house, because I did go to Mark's house once when he lived in Sandy. So maybe that was it. But it was just a gradual kind of hang around. Hey, how you doing? It's exactly the same way you become friends with somebody in high school. You see them, you sit next to them in chemistry, start playing ball together.
So as you started, as that friendship developed and as you got more and more involved with him, it sounds like you became more actively involved in the work that he was doing, and he was showing you things that he was finding, and he was kind of telling you the stories of how he found it. And then you started having more of a business relationship with him, where you would be involved or present with some of these presentations, or where he was negotiating and stuff like that. Right. So as that relationship evolved, obviously in the moment, I'm guessing you were caught up in this incredible kind of whirlwind friendship and all this crazy stuff that was happening, and this cool, fascinating, journey that you guys were on. But now, hindsight, looking at it, was he a good friend? Was he manipulative to you? Was he, what when you look back and see that relationship, what was he like as a friend and as a, colleague?
Well, he was a good friend. He's a nice person. His wife is a very nice person. They had 2 or 3 little kids. So when we'd go to their house, at that time, their oldest was probably 5 or 6. So it was, that kind of 2 more girls. Mm-hmm. And so, we're both Mormons. And now, as time goes on with him, I start to learn some of his, not criminal activity. Vices? Well, that's not true. Maybe you could say criminal activity. But I learned his religious views. I knew that by 1983, I knew that he was atheist. I knew he was keeping up a front.
Did he tell you that, or did you just...
Oh, he told me.
What did he say?
Well, sorry, I'm hesitating because I could tell you a real stinker story.
I'd love to hear it.
That not many people have heard.
Let's hear it.
Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, hold on for this one. When I say that he was an atheist by 14, he told me one time when I was at his house and we were talking, and I don't know what the subject was, but this story I will never forget. He wanted to deceive his parents, and he wanted to tell them that he had seen an angel. And what he was going to do is he had gotten a hold of anti-Mormon literature at least by 14, and maybe a little earlier than that. And one of those anti-Mormon books described in some detail what goes on in the Mormon temple ordinance, temple ceremony. And so what he said was, he wanted to fool his parents. So what he wanted to do was come upstairs from where his bedroom was as a kid and tell them, I've seen an angel, and an angel talked to me. And of course, they wouldn't believe him. You didn't either. You're just saying that. But what he would do is tell them to use as evidence a few, 2 or 3 things that come from the temple ceremony, that there's no way a child could ever know that.
Did he do it?
I don't think he ever did.
But he was thinking that was so okay. So he tells you this, but did he still maintain the front to you that he was atheist? He didn't believe in any of this stuff. He was trying to deceive his parent, but that all of the work that he was doing was authentic. So,
yes,
were you suspicious of that? Or?
Business stuff. But let me tell you something, and this is something very difficult for people to get their heads around. And to this day, there are people that still don't believe it's possible. But that is, he had the ability, and still does, I guess, in the United States I'm going to give you an example, a parallel. He's able to be in Arizona and go to a Circle K and buy a Powerball and win the big prize and never tell anybody.
He did that?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying I'm drawing a parallel.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Who do you know? Could I do that and never tell anybody? Eventually, it's going to slip out to somebody, to one person, to 2 people. It's going to slip out. Him, never. Which means that he forged all that stuff and never told anybody. Not me, not Lynn, not Brent Metcalf, not Kurt Bench, not his wife, not his parents. Nobody, ever.
So he told you, I don't believe any of this stuff. I don't even believe that God exists. I think this is all a bunch of nonsense, but I have a knack for finding stuff. I have a knack for finding these things, and I have a knack for, and it's a good business and it's lucrative, and come along with me and we'll make some money doing it.
Yes. And he went all over the place. See, towards the end in 85, he had shifted away from LDS stuff.
Yeah.
And the bulk had switched over to US stuff. And so people say, yes, he tried to take down the LDS church. That's not true, because he didn't stay on the LDS church. He shifted over to Americana and was doing, like the Oath of a Freeman, was doing unbelievably well.
Again, authenticated everywhere. FBI authenticating it. The biggest experts in the entire world and country were looking at this stuff saying, yeah, it's legit. I mean, running it through every test you could run these things through to prove that they were false, and they were coming back that they were authentic. I mean, at every level.
Everywhere. And let me tell you, I'll tell you another secret story on how deep this goes. He was, you see in the documentary, Justin Schiller talking. What they don't tell you in the document is they make it sound like Mark wasted all of his money on flying and going to expensive dinners. That wasn't where the money went. He bought first editions of children's literature and had one of the finest collections in the United States. And that was Schiller Wapner's specialty. Well, they used them to act as agent to sell that Oath of a Freeman. Sorry, I'm going to have to talk a little bit slower. Anyway, Justin Schiller kept believing that the Oath of a Freeman that he had in a safe deposit box in New York was still viable, still true. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how long he kept that belief. But I just found out from something that I read that Justin Schiller wrote. All these years, I didn't know this till just recently. Mark is at home, blown up, in a wheelchair, with no money, just trying to get along, month to month, and trying to pay an attorney for doing all this work. He somehow found money, $10,000, wrote a check and sent it to Justin Schiller to keep up his work on authenticating that. And Justin still believed it was real. Most dealers, other than him, had given up by then.
Yeah.
It said, this stuff's got to be forged. Even if they didn't have an evidence, they'd still forget it. Well, that's not true. The Emily Dickinson poem actually takes the record. That went longest of all. But that thing, Justin Schiller, even after that, we're still thinking that thing's real.
Yeah, just to give just to kind of touch on this. I mean, when you're talking about the forged Americana stuff, it wasn't just LDS materials. There was, according to Wikipedia, documents and signatures and forms and stuff from George Washington, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Daniel Boone, John Brown, Andrew Jackson, Mark Twain, Nathan Hale, John Hancock, Francis Scott Key, Abraham Lincoln, John Milton, Paul Revere, Miles Standish, Button Gwinnett, Emily Dickinson. It was the breadth of work, that he was putting in to and again, the documentary says, we'll never know how much Hofmann fabrications are out there in circulation today that are still being bought and sold and purchased and in a museum somewhere, or because there was so much that nobody even knew about that he was doing behind closed doors, or that he was putting out into circulation one way or the other.
My personal belief is most of the written stuff has been found. I'm sure there's some things that have not, but where the most unfound ones is in coins.
Yeah.
Because there's a way to find it. You put that coin on a block of dry ice and that electroplated piece will flake off. And it's just something curious. Again, something for your audience to think about. How many coin owners in the United States have in their collection some coins with problems, forged something, and don't want to know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's not something you want to find out if you spent a pretty penny, no pun intended, but on some of this stuff, that's not something you want to know. Going back to the LDS stuff. So you had referenced this earlier, but the big one of the in the early days of the LDS faith, you've got this transition of power from prophet to prophet where Joseph Smith died. He was murdered. And there was this transition point, which wasn't really determined at that point, at least amongst the members of the faith, which I don't know, tens of thousands at that time, maybe more. I don't know the number, but Joseph Smith dies, and it was kind of like, well, who's the next prophet? This whole purpose of this faith is that we believe God communicates with prophets still, that this is happening. And there was a big dispute between the idea that it should be passed down to the Smith family, to the sons of Joseph Smith, and from their sons to their sons, that it would be, built, passed down that way. But then there was another belief that it would be more of a priesthood authority passing down, from one leader to another. And so what ended up happening, and it caused a big rift in the church early on, is that Brigham Young, who many people have heard of, whether you know about the church or not, because of BYU, Brigham Young University, or you may have heard that name for better or for worse, he became the next prophet. And so Joseph Smith's family, his kids, his wife, maybe questionable, but a lot of them left and said, we're not going, the Mormons left where they were at that time in Nauvoo and then kind of back east, Midwest, back east, and then said, we're going to Utah. And a lot of them said, no, we're staying behind. We're done. We're over it. And then some of them went as far to say it's not true anymore because my dad died and I'm supposed to be the prophet, right? And so now this was a huge sticking point, and a lot of in the faith, a lot of members of the church left at that point. And so one of the documents that Mark Hofmann forged early on was this Joseph Smith III blessing, which was supposedly a blessing given to, was it a blessing given from Joseph Smith to his son?
Yes.
And it was saying that he would be, and he was supposed to be, the next prophet if he ever were to die, or if and when he were to die.
Yes.
So that piece of information, obviously, again, is very, very divisive in the LDS faith, because it was potentially going to prove, oh, Brigham Young actually never should have been the prophet. Joseph Smith said otherwise before he died, which means that all of what has happened in the church since was built on a lie. Again, this could be a very, and so there was a bidding war, it sounds like, or there was a basically war to get this document between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the leadership at that time, but also the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which stemmed from Joseph Smith's family that believed they should maintain authority and, that their son should be the prophet. I think I'm explaining that well. But talk to me about that document and the significance there and of that forgery.
Well, this thing involves a number of things. There was actually 6 different paths that the succession could have taken, but one of them would have been Joseph Smith III. But at the time, he was only 13 years old when his dad died. So he couldn't have taken over then. It just would have had to have been later. But just like the Anthem Transcript, it was spoken of, people knew about it, there were people that were present, but there was no written documentation. Mark finds the written documentation.
Where did he supposedly find that one? Do you know?
That one I don't know. That's funny, I don't know. I know a lot of them, but that's one I don't know what the story is. But this does tell you something very interesting about Mark, because when he supposedly found this, he knew that the church that was the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now goes by the name Community of Christ, that the headquarters are in Independence, Missouri. And so just people of that church, I'm not being mean to you. It's just easier to say reorganized right now, because that's what they were when this was all happening. So I'm not being mean. Mark went to them first and said, I found this. Would you be interested? And they were very interested. And again, for another book of commandments. And then about a week later, they wanted to complete the transaction, and Mark had changed his mind. He had gone to the LDS Church in Salt Lake and went ahead and traded to them. And that is something, when people say that Mark was a crud, he was. He did that many times. He would tell one person one thing, then tell another person something else. And then they'd find out, and it was a fight. And lots of people got mad at him, wouldn't deal with him, or would stop dealing and then deal later. Brent Ashworth, oh my heavens, the number of times he was so angry at Mark, never for forgery, but always being disingenuous. Now what happened was, it kind of got smoothed over. The LDS Church took it, then they traded to the organized church for a book of commandments, and then everybody was okay. And for the organized church, that was big. They have a lovely pamphlet they put out. They had it framed and up in their main building for several years. Huge. Wow. And then you can imagine for them, the whole thing just down the toilet.
Man, the path of destruction. When this all came out, I can't imagine how many people were so let alone the murders that happened, but I'm just saying, like, the path from his forgeries and his deceit and lying and bad practices. I mean, the amount of people that were just absolutely hosed through this is unbelievable. So, so this is a more personal question, humanizing this as you as being the person that went through this actual experience. Because again, this sounds like something you'd read about or watch a movie about, right? But this all happened. And this is a bit of a personal question, but let me know your thoughts. Part of being a member of any faith is, again, these the proofs that you look for in order to gain and build that faith and that testimony, to be able to look at somebody and say, yeah, I know that this is true. That's part of any religion or any dedication to something, some sort of faith or hope or, in this case, religion. But you saw, we'll go back to that the Salamander Letter, the Anthem Transcript. Well, you saw these things and were told that they were original, that they were authentic. And you looked at it through the lens of not only a collector and, an intellect that was kind of trying to understand these things, but you also, I'm guessing, looked at these and had spiritual experiences in the process of seeing these things and feeling these things. You know what I mean? Is that accurate? I guess the question is, did you at some point believe, based on spiritual, not the intellectual side, but based on the spiritual side of who you are, man, I'm having these amazing experiences. This stuff is true. I felt the Spirit tell me. I felt a confirmation of some sort spiritually that this stuff is true. Did you ever have that experience while seeing, holding, touching, feeling, photographing, being part of these documents?
Well, I hope I'm not a bummer, but no, I didn't ever have a spiritual connection to that. But that's partially because the collecting side is so powerful.
Yeah.
And this is true for anybody that has gotten the disease of collecting. Because let me tell you, it is a disease.
It's addictive, yeah, I know.
It will take over your life. The thrill of the hunt, the thrill of the acquisition, the thrill of the possession, and then the thrill for me, and I think there's other people that do this, there is a thrill when you hold a letter that it is real, that Abraham Lincoln sat at his desk at the White House during the war and write, "Dear sir, I commend you for your service as a general for the Army of the Potomac." Whatever.
Yeah.
Gosh, it's wow to think his hand touched that thing you are touching. It is unbelievable. And then for it to go back and you can get it on small scales. I've got a widow's mite. In the New Testament talks about, there's the story about Jesus is sitting and listening, and the woman comes with the widow's mite and puts it in a clink, clink. And
yeah,
you can get those widow mite, and I've got one. That's 2,000 years old.
Wow. Yeah. No,
That is a real widow's mite. Wow. Yeah. I don't think it's the one that the widow used.
Yeah.
It's just one of thousands. But, oh my heavens. So that is true. Very powerful.
That's a great answer. And I love the context there, because I'm somebody that it's funny. This is a completely different world. But a couple of weeks ago, we had on the podcast this guy that they call King Pokemon. Have you heard of Pokemon?
I've heard of it.
So Pokemon is a Japanese cartoon, but they started in the late 90s making these cards that are collectibles. And this guy has developed the biggest Pokemon card collection But anyways, and I talked to him about this as well, but it's obviously a completely different world. But that addiction to collecting is the same. That the feeling of finding the thing. I have this with me as well with certain things that I do, where it's like I've got to find the one that nobody else has found, or the thing that's the oldest, or I totally understand that. And so that the rush and the high and the thrill of that pursuit, I can see how that would, especially in this case where so much was on the line. I can't imagine the intensity there, and that the rush that must have been, that would have made it really easy to continue to maybe, I don't want to say turn a blind eye because that makes it sound like it was intentional, but maybe not notice other things going on because it's just the thrill and the rush of this game that is finding these documents and holding them and touching them and seeing them.
I understand your question, and I'm sorry, I'm just different that way.
No,
Maybe
again,
some people did. But
yeah, it's not the spiritual side. It's more the psychological, mental side of it. That is the rush and the thrill. It has nothing to do with it. That's perfect.
Yeah. I totally get that for anybody. I mean, I listened to one of your podcasts, the fellow that had something to do with Apple computers.
Guy Kawasaki.
Yes. I can imagine there's guys today that they quest for old computers, and to get an old Apple or a Macintosh or something that's signed by Steve Wozniak or something.
Yeah.
Whoa. Cool.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. I think the biggest, maybe not, but at least the documentary, one of the big things that they focused on, as we talk a little bit more about Mark Hofmann's evil genius and his ability to forge, but was the Salamander Letter. So again, if you're looking at the history of the LDS faith, Joseph Smith, as I said before, said, hey, I had this vision where I saw God and I saw Jesus Christ, and they told me that the church, that I needed to help bring back the same church that Christ put on the earth. I need to be a part of bringing that church back to the world and preaching that gospel. And then eventually they said, there's a book and he saw an angel that came to him and said, there's a book that's hidden in this gold plates. You need to translate it. That was the story. That was the belief. It still stands to this day. That's the belief amongst members of that faith. The Salamander Letter painted a different picture, and it was a letter. Was it another letter? It was from Martin Harris, right? It was a letter from him to who?
It was very well done by Mark, because it was written by Martin Harris and addressed to somebody named W.W. Phelps.
Yeah.
And if you're a church member, you recognize that name. So perfect. Two people that everybody goes, yeah, we know who both of those are. Yeah.
And so again, makes sense. Logical. It's a letter, and it says, I don't know. I haven't read it in a long time. I read it once upon a time, and I said, but basically it says there is, the story that's been told is what I heard. What Joseph Smith told me directly was that he actually saw a white salamander that led him on this chase to find it had nothing to do with this Moroni guy, this angel. It was all this. He saw a salamander that led him, but he didn't want to tell that story because it was, it's weird or something. I don't know exactly. I can't remember, But this really, at the core of the LDS faith, is the Book of Mormon. They tell you from day one when you're learning about this church or whatever, that is the keystone of the religion. If the Book of Mormon is true, they say, then the church is true. It is a true faith, and so when he's now saying the way that book was discovered and found was a lie, it wasn't something that was told correctly from the beginning. Again, it was really something that shook the faith of a lot of people that said, I've built my testimony on this foundation that I'm now hearing was a lie. It's not true. And he got this document, this letter, passed off by everybody, all the way up to the very highest members of the church. The leadership of the church came out, and in what the meeting that's known as General Conference, where every 6 months the members of the church all convene together and learn from the leadership of the church. Even at that pulpit, in that meeting, it was discussed and talked about, saying, and the church was having to figure out ways to say, yeah, this is legit, and try to explain it one way or another. But again, all the while it was a forgery. That is just, again, that's why I asked that question earlier, was this with the intent to bring down the church in one way or another? To which you said, you don't think so. It was more just personal gain and, the addiction of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But,
because it turns out that letter really wasn't that hurtful to the church.
Yeah.
Because the person that was involved, Moroni, in the church, you always see that as a human man.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what that letter did is it introduced folk magic of that part of the world, which turns out is actually very legitimate and really happened. Now, most members had never heard any of the folk magic side to this. And it's actually, out of the total word count, is very small. And the rest of it just substantiates the regular story. But when he goes to where those gold plates were, it's the Moroni, which Mark Harris calls the old spirit. But the old spirit turned into a white salamander.
Oh, okay.
That's different.
Yeah.
That's different. As it turns out, not completely different. Everything Mark had in there could be found in other places with enough research. But to the average member, that was very different.
Well, what was the aftermath? What effect did that have on the church at that time? As somebody who was very close to this and lived through this, what was the conversation and what were the members? What affected that? The Salamander Letter and some of these other forgeries have on the church membership at that time?
Long term, I'm not sure.
I guess right then in that time,
it was a thing that was very, very I don't know. I'm searching for the right word. Not shattering, surprising.
Yeah.
Surprising to the average member. And so everybody, including Steve Christensen, they wanted to get rid of it, but they wanted research done on it so it could be put in context. And I think people would have eventually gotten kind of their minds hooked onto that. It would have taken some time. But what that does is just tell more about the LDS Church and its beginnings. Mm-hmm. Every church has very strange things in their beginnings. Let me give you an example so people that are Mormons can kind of get a more of a view of this. It turns out that Martin Luther, who began the Lutheran religion, Protestantism, so big in Christianity, he did big things. He also was one of the biggest anti-Semites that Christianity has ever produced. Terrible anti-Semite, Jew hater of the first accord. Well, I bet very few Lutherans know that. And I bet very few, even smaller number of Protestants know that. So, wow, what do we do with this? How do we think about it? It's the same sort of thing. Now, I think the same thing happens. I believe that there are Lutherans today, if they were to be taught the full extent, especially now, of Martin Luther's anti-Semitism, they would make them quit. They would say, I can't keep going to this church.
Yeah. I
don't want to be part of a church that was begun by somebody that bad. Yeah. With me in my church, it doesn't do that. But I understand that people just say, you know what? This just doesn't fit me anymore. It does several things. The church's view on whatever, on LGBTQ or on, any number of things that people just say, that's just not what I can do anymore. Okay. Now they look at me and say, what's the matter with you? How can you know this stuff and still stay? Well, I've got reasons. Deeply seated and firmly held reasons deeply held beliefs that keep me close to that church, knowing about the problems. But can I tell you, let me give a little example. As it turns out, you haven't seen her. But I married one of the best women in the world. Backbone of stainless steel. Incredible. She's got some problems. She likes me, and she can tell you about some of my problems. That's life. That's life. I love my parents. They were the best people in the world. They did some things wrong. So I still think they're the best parents for me.
Yeah. And the world, take just the world as a whole, or I guess maybe we'll just narrow it down to the United States. Statistically, year after year after year, there's less and less religious people. There's more and more atheists. There's less people that attend church regularly. There's less God-fearing individuals. And you see that within more, on a micro level within the church, the LDS faith. A lot of this information that you're referring to, where for very many years within the LDS faith, it was a lot more of the surface story of the, I guess the word to use that's not restoration, but more like the launch of the religion. A lot of that story was told more superficially or more on the surface because it was easier to get out that way. And communication was through, church on Sunday and printed documents that you received in a book or and then you had the scriptures, obviously, and you had but as the internet's continued to evolve and more people have been able to dive into more of the historical information they're finding on the internet, whether it's true or not. Sometimes it is very true and shakes their faith. Sometimes it's bogus and shakes their faith as well. And they don't know that it's not real. But that's something that has become more and more of a problem for all religions. You mentioned the Martin Luther reference, but also within the LDS faith as well. And so what are some, I kind of want to ask the question, what are some of those most common most common facts about, like, that are true facts about the restoration of the church, about the launch of this new religion back in the day and some of the things that happened? What are some of the biggest facts that shake people the most that you've seen? And what are some of and if you're having a debate, for example, we talked about maybe a podcast you're going to be on down the road a little bit where some of this stuff might come up. But if you were to have a conversation with somebody and they said, well, what about this? What are some of the most common ones you hear? And what are some of the, responses that you have to some of those?
Sure.
I'm going to leverage your expertise at this point in the conversation, because I know you know a lot about this stuff.
What a lot of people today have a problem with is the multiple accounts of the first vision.
The first vision, meaning when Joseph Smith claims and where he said that he saw God and Jesus as two separate beings that came to him, and God said, hey, Joseph, this is my son. He's got some things he wants to tell you. And that question, that is a very monumental fact in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because it is right there saying God and Jesus are two separate beings, and that a human being on earth saw those people. So that's when Shannon says first vision, that's what he's talking about. So there's multiple different accounts. There's different stories of how Joseph Smith had that experience.
Yes. And they change from what most people know. Most people have read and heard the third account of Joseph Smith, done in 1838. His first one was in 1832. And both the first and the second, he only says there was one person, not two. Well, that flabbergasts people. One? No, there was two. Well, he said there was one. And so that really throws people for a real loop.
So what do you say to somebody that comes to you and says, well, can't be true, because Joseph Smith obviously made up the third time. He made it up that there was two people.
Well, this is the way I understand that. All of them are true according to what Joseph Smith knew and understood at the time. The first one in 1832 was partially written in Joseph Smith's own hand, and it's the only one that ever appears. Joseph didn't read and write very well, so you don't find many things in his hand, but that one is partially in his hand. And see, for me, that doesn't bother me a bit, because he was telling the story the way he understood it at the time.
And in that year, you said 1832?
Uh-huh.
And so the church was officially organized in 1830. This experience that Joseph Smith had was in 1820. So you're 12 years removed from the actual experience before he actually wrote anything down about it. And you're saying part of that was in his own hand and he didn't write well.
Didn't write much, but I emphasize that is because my point is you've got to remember many things. One of them is in 1820, Joseph Smith was 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If anybody ever wants to have a fun experience and you have a 14-year-old, do some activity. And when you're done, ask your 14-year-old what happened.
Their mind is elsewhere. Yeah.
They just don't think the way an adult does. And so he is trying to interpret a 14-year-old's experience in 1832, coming from a religion or a life that there's always one. Christianity outside of Mormonism is monotheistic.
Mm-hmm.
They talk about three, but they're always one person. And so it's silly to expect Joseph to believe or think anything more than one.
Yeah.
It took some time. It took some learning. It took some life for him to stop and think, wait, there were two. There were two there. Or there was two, but only one where he did all the talking.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the way he tells it. And so after that, he tells it always as two people. So to me, that's not a lie. That's not a fabrication. That's a young person getting their head around something as good as they can. And there's a lot of things that happened with Joseph Smith. You know, the way he translated the Book of Mormon, he used a stone and he stopped using it because he just stopped. He just got used to not doing that anymore. And so put it away. Interestingly, one of the three witnesses, David Whitmer, thought Joseph Smith had stopped becoming a seer because he wasn't using his seer stone anymore. He just did things differently. But I do that. See, when people say, well, that's crazy. That's just you're making up stuff. I think, no, I'm not. Because I'm 63 years old now. I think about things in my life years ago a lot differently than I did at the time. A lot different than I did. So I give him the space to do that. Now, if we could talk to him somehow and say, what about this? He would probably have some things to say about that. But that to me just says, later on, I think about things differently. You know, Joseph Smith had the belief that our Father in heaven had a father. And I could find it for you. It was in 1835. And he says, it wasn't till that year, he said, that it ever dawned on me that our Heavenly Father had a father. And I'm not going into the theology of that. I'm going into Joseph Smith being a real person. That says, oh, I've never thought of that before.
Yeah.
Any couple that has kids, oh my heavens, what changes from your first child to your fourth is just massive.
Yeah. I'm in the thick of that right now. Just had our fourth, and I can attest that you are. That is very true. I think
you're mean, you're rotten, you're stupid. No, I'm just getting along in life and learning things.
Yeah, I think this doesn't just go for Joseph Smith or any other religious leader. It goes for really any historical. Like you said before, you talked about your parents. You know, you learn, you gain insight and perspective, and you say, my parents weren't perfect, but people change, people evolve, and this goes with historical figures of all sorts. And there's no way for them, in this case, him, to understand how for years and hundreds of years, every single thing he said and wrote, and people who heard this and then wrote about it, there's no way to understand the amplification and magnification on these little things over 200, 300, 400 years, and as time continues to pass. And so you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, some of these things really hang people up. Do you have another one of those things that you hear a lot about that you've pondered on or thought about or studied?
Well, yeah. One of the biggest ones is polygamy.
Mm-hmm.
That just really sends people over the edge. The concept that Joseph Smith had more than one wife. I mean, there's even LDS people that don't think he did. They'll think Brigham Young did. But it was Joseph Smith who initiated that practice, and it essentially came to the front in 1841 in Nauvoo, Illinois. And so that's one that are questioned from both inside and out. Where does that come from? Why? How did it work? What did he do? What did other people do? What was its point? Huge. And that one will never, none of these will ever go away. None of these will ever go away. Because they never do. They never do in any religion. And I don't bring these up to defend Mormonism or Joseph Smith. I'm just drawing parallels. Today, the books that are written about Jesus of Nazareth and him being the Messiah and what that meant, oh my gosh. The volumes, the hundreds, the thousands of books, the number of people who go to school and get PhDs, and that's their career, their whole life. Never goes away. People, yes. People, no. Today, there are still significant sections that argue strongly that Jesus of Nazareth never existed.
Yeah.
There was no such person. It's been made up. And see, Mormonism has only got, less than 200 years going.
Yep.
So we're brand new
Yep.
in this. Brand new.
And it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, was this heart versus intellect, and obviously tying this into the Mark Hofmann thing that the whole extravaganza of Mark Hofmann and what he did is, and people today, obviously on a much smaller scale from what he did, but it really does come down when people have beliefs that they're willing to dedicate time, energy, effort, and in many ways their life to either promote or defend or back up or whatever it might be, these causes. Almost anything that you're tied to, whether it's political or religious or other, you could poke holes in, and intellectually you can say this is clearly wrong. And there's always going to be room for debate on all of these things. And that's where this extra level, the heart, comes in, which allows people to say, I can't understand fully this, all of this, any of this, some of this. Sometimes it seems like all of it, sometimes this specific instant, for instance, but that's where that heart or the spirit can come in and help bridge that gap. Right. I often have said, and this is personally, but sometimes if I'm ever studying or thinking about or pondering on eternity or whatever, then you feel like you almost go and go and go, and then you kind of hit a wall where you're like, oh, I can't fathom, I can't conceive anything more than this. I'm done. That I've hit the max. And then again, that's where oftentimes people say, well, I need to continue onward with this, and I need to logically be able to figure this out and solve this. And other people say, I've hit that point for a reason. I'm going to allow faith to guide me through the rest, or that spiritual side of it. So I appreciate your perspective. And again, you're somebody who's been very close to these, who studied a lot of this, that is very, very good perspective for anybody of any faith to be able to hear, that these are things that over time, things continue to change and evolve, and understandings continue to change and evolve. And give people the benefit of the doubt. Not always, but sometimes. Obviously, to kind of to bring this home, and I appreciate your time so much, but to bring this all together. So you had a friend and a business associate and an acquaintance and somebody who you spent time with both professionally, you spent time with personally, you spent time with in all these different contexts, who lied, cheated, deceived everybody in his life, including you as a friend and as a colleague. And then you found out that not only did he lie and cheat and do all these forgeries, but he actually took it to the point where in order to try to cover his tracks and in order to try to make things right one way or another with some of the dealings that he got in way over his head on, he committed murder and he took the lives of 2 innocent people. And really, without much, you hear the interviews after all of this was done, without much remorse, without much, he really, any human nature that he seems to have had goes out the window when you hear him talk so blatantly about, well, I put this bomb in front of their house. I didn't really care if it was him or his wife or a kid or a dog. I didn't really care who got it. Somebody was going to get it. I mean, to be able to say that with zero feeling and sentiment in your voice, obviously, is, again, psychopath, right? So not only did you find out that your good friend and colleague was a murderer and a fraud, that's bad enough. You were then put in the hot seat, and for a minute, your name was on every news station, not just in Utah, but in the country and in parts of the world, for this story that was developing, where it was said Shannon Flynn, colleague, whatever, owns an Uzi, an illegal weapon that was bought by this guy, and we now are throwing him in jail on this charge, but we're pretty sure. And they started, throwing out there's a real good chance that he's the guy behind this. We found a book at his house that shows how to make these bombs that you just happen to have. And we're going to go, you told me earlier, we're going to find this, we're going to go search his storage locker. And then they look in the storage locker, they don't find anything. And they say, well, that's definitely where the bombs were made, but he moved it. We're going to find it. I mean, so for a solid period of time, you were being persecuted or prosecuted by the news and stuff as the potential, not only, your friend did this, but now you're the one that did it. And the emotional roller coaster you must have been on during that process is something that most people will never understand or comprehend, those moments that you had as an individual going through this. What was that like? That's a big question. I know I'm bringing a lot of things together for the sake of time, but what was that time like in your life to realize the fraud, realize the murderer, be put on trial, basically, again, not actually in a courtroom for the murders, but by the people around you, the people in your life, really having to question this because the news is saying that there's a good chance you're the guy that did it and all this. I mean, what was life like for that couple of months there?
Well, it was obviously very intense. I acquired an attorney very quickly. And so I had been put in jail on a Friday night, and I had an attorney by Sunday morning. And he actually came down to visit through a barrier on the Sunday. And he snuck my wife in as the secretary. And then I went to the federal court on Monday and was able to bail out, which was great because being left in jail would have been, I can't imagine.
And then how long was it from when you got bailed out to when you were off the hook officially for being involved in the murders?
Well, that depends on how you view that. As far as, let's see, how can I'm searching for the right words here. From the legal viewpoint, it was not until January of 1987, because when Mark went to court to plead guilty, part of his plea arrangement, amongst several things, was to say I had nothing to do with it, that the machine gun was not mine, it was his. I had no part in that, and he took the blame for everything. So at that point, the police there's nothing more they could do. I did actually have to pay a fine with that part of it because it was very messed up. The federal prosecutors did some things dishonest. They lied about some things. But on another hand, today, there's still people think I got away with something. There are still people that think, oh, he lied better than anybody and got away with it somehow. They don't know how, but they still think I am. So in that view, it's never gone away. But for the short time, what you were talking about, for that month and a half, I had a wife, like I said, with a backbone of steel. I had parents, I had family, I had my wife's family, I had friends, Lynn Jacobs, Kurt Bench. We were all caught in the whirlwind, in the hurricane. And so we relied upon each other as supports. And then it was, you just had to put your head down, get in the harness, and keep pulling. That's all there is to it. And people say, well, that's not very glamorous, and it's not. You just live life. Like I say, you're sort of an oxen, and you put the harness on and you put your head down and you keep pulling. And so for me, in order for me to present a good picture, I had to go back working where I had about a year before. I didn't want to go back working there, but I had to. And there was no money. There was no magic money coming from anywhere. Get in the harness, keep pulling to live.
And what was your motivation through that when you're having to go through all of this traumatic experience? And I'm guessing it probably played, maybe not. Seems like for me, maybe so I'm projecting a little bit, but that would cause a big distrust just amongst people to say, well, if I could be deceived at this level for this long, it would probably build up some barriers maybe to the way that I trusted other people. So again, that's probably, I don't know if that affected you that way, but what during that, where you're having to kind of work through this and you're saying you just would get in the harness and, and just put your head down, what are your motivations in that? How are you finding hope and optimism after this traumatic experience that had very obviously affected your life in a big way?
Well, I've been thinking about this, and this is how I think it's well to speak of this, because this principle I still believe in to this day, and that is the primacy and power of truth. Primacy and power of truth. If you believe that there is a truth and it can be had and you can find it, you can get it, you can search for it, you can dig, whatever it is, that you can find it, I think truth will carry you through. And you can hold on to that as a rod, a stick, a pole, something. And you can think of it a way. A hurricane of life comes. And if you can get a hold of the steel of truth and hold on to it, it will keep you up and through, and truth will win, will carry you through. Now, like in life, you're going to take some shots. Arrows are going to be shot at you. In the hurricane, bricks off the house will hit you. A 2x4 will hit you. And to think, well, I can have a life where I can avoid that. I don't know that there is anybody in life, unless you're crazy and you're 50 years old and you live in your basement of your mom's house and never change your sweatpants. I don't know. But anybody that gets out and has a life and does something, whatever it is, your profession, what I did, a doctor, a plumber, whatever, you're the truth of you, the truth of what you know, the truth of your family. They all will. And then you need to turn around and think, okay, now that I believe that, who can I help? Which one of my friends can I help them out? Can I put my arm around them and say, I know what's truth with you. I'll put my arm around you and I'll stand with you. Because I had people that did that. We'll put our arm around you and we'll stand with you. And that's how we made it. Now, I still have that. I got cancer. I got to hold on to truth to get me through it. Because I have people put their arm around you and say, I'll stand with you. Gets you through. Gets you through. And then it isn't just me, but then you can help one other person, 2 other people. Yeah.
Well, that is profound. And I appreciate you taking your life's experiences and being able to, condense them down and really distill that down into that lesson, which I think is, even when you were in that hurricane in your earlier life, caught up in this controversy and this, nonsense that Mark Hofmann created through his wicked ways and his deceit and, evil doing, being able to hold to the people that were the closest to you, to have people put their arm around you, like you said, and say, hey, no matter what you're seeing everywhere else, we believe in you. We trust you. We have faith in you. And then again, later in life with the, the cancer diagnosis and that same, they're 2 very, very different hurricanes, but nonetheless, the principle is the same, which is, you holding on to what you believe and gives you hope and truth, and who is that's authentic to you, but also the people around you, and being able to feel that love and support from the people around you. And then, like you said, paying that forward and being able to have that perspective now that you've been through these things, to be able to look out for people outside of you as well and say, they're going through something like I went through. I need to have their back and I need to be there for them. I think that's powerful and something that I am so grateful to have met you and to have this conversation, because again, I don't have the perspective that you do, because my life's experiences are different. Right. And I this is what it's all about for me, is to continue to learn and grow and identify, again, as in the context of this podcast, how people get through things, how they find hope, how they find optimism, even when things get tough. And I appreciate it. There's 20 questions I wrote down here that we didn't even get to, and I knew that would happen because there's so much to talk about. But you are so generous with your time, and I've taken a lot of it, so I appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say or add before we wrap up things today?
No, that thing of the truth really sums up, what, we can always talk about specifics. This happened, that happened, whatever. And that's, like I said, in your life, you have specifics, that you do and stuff. But that idea of truth being the thing that will hold on to you, if you hold on to it, man, that's a game changer.
Well, it's interesting that that's the takeaway, and that's the lesson learned of many, but in this case that you were able to distill it down to that, because you look at the exact opposite, the antithesis of what you said is Mark Hofmann. Everything that came out of his mouth and everything he said and did for years and years and years was an absolute lie, and look where it got him. Right? It led him down paths of absolute wicked and evil and destruction. And then, there he sits as we have this conversation, rotting away in prison, and things caught up. And it was the antithesis of truth. It was lie, deceit, and all of that. So thank you so much, Shannon. You're a gem of a guy. I appreciate the time and you answering all my questions. And I'm excited for people to hear this. This will be eye-opening and a lot more context into the documentary. So if you haven't watched the documentary, Murder Among the Mormons. Go watch it. And if you haven't seen it yet, a lot of what we talked about today will make a lot more sense. And if you have, watched it, you're lucky because it's a good documentary and very eye-opening. So thank you so much, Shannon. Appreciate your time, man.
You bet. And just know I'm looking forward to our turn at Mata's for some tacos.
Let's do it. Hey, I've got your number now. You're not getting rid of me. I will reach out. We'll go grab lunch and we'll continue the conversation off the record.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Shannon, so much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy Podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy Podcast.